Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Sleepwalker podcast. This is episode 3, and we are your hosts. I'm Chris, we have Ken, and we have Jared.
What up?
How's it going, everyone?
And on this episode, we're talking about the mysterious disappearance of the 5 Sodder children. So, the story begins on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1945. A fire destroyed the Sodder residence located in Fayetteville, West Virginia. The house contained the Sodder family, which consisted of George Sodder, his wife Jenny, and 9 out of their 10 children. During the fire, only George, Jenny, and 4 of the children escaped. 5 of the children never escaped, and the bodies were never found. However, the family always maintained that the 5 missing children had survived somehow. The house was never rebuilt. Instead, the family converted the site into a memorial garden for the missing children. On the night of the fire, at 12:30 a.m., Jenny Sodder was woken by a phone call from a mysterious woman who asked for a strange name and was heard laughing on the phone with someone. At 1 a.m., Jenny was again wakened by a loud noise, which sounded like something hitting the roof, followed by a rolling noise. As she was returning to bed, she noticed that the curtains and lights were still on in the house. She stated that the children usually close the curtains and turn off the lights before they went to bed, which she found unusual. Thinking nothing else of it, she proceeded to go back to bed. At 1:30 a.m., she was awoken again to the smell of smoke, and when she got up, she noticed that there was a fire in George's office. She then immediately woke up George, and George then started alerting his other children in the immediate vicinity, which included his eldest son. As they tried to exit the house, Jenny, George, and 4 of the children were able to escape the house fire. Immediately once they were outside of the house, they began yelling for the children upstairs, as they were unable to use the stairs to the attic as it was on fire. And in the attic is where the 5 children were asleep. Many attempts were taken to save the children in the attic, which proved unsuccessful. Outside the house, George attempted to rescue the children in the attic by scaling the wall and trying to break an attic window, which proved unsuccessful. He then attempted to use a ladder to get to the children, but was unable to find it from its usual spot. After both attempts failed, he tried pulling up 2 of his work trucks to stand on. Neither him nor his son could get the truck to start. Unable to rescue the 5 children from the attic, they stood outside the house watching it burn, and then eventually the house collapsed after 45 minutes. The fire department was not able to immediately respond as they were short-staffed due to the war that was currently going on, which was World War II. When the fire department did arrive, which was much later in the morning, so there was a period of time that had passed between this, the firefighters began searching the ashes of the family home and were unable to locate any remains of the 5 Sodder children. The firefighters later claimed that they had found bone fragments and internal organs, but this was much later. It wasn't on the same day of the search. After 5 days of going by waiting for official reports from the firefighters, the police department, and the coroner's office, George, who grew impatient, bulldozed 5 feet of dirt to cover the site into Memorial Garden in remembrance of the 5 children. However, surviving Sodder family members began questioning many of the details from the night, started believing that the 5 children were still alive, that they had survived from the fire. So this leads us into many of the mysterious facts that led to the lead both George and Jenny Sodder and the surviving children to believe that the 5 children were still alive. And I am going to pass this one on over. So Ken, I know you took a lot of time researching this. What were you able to come up about this weird, mysterious case?
I think that the phone lines that were cut on that 14-foot pole was a sign of foul play. It was strange that the fact that the fire department couldn't respond for 7 hours. I mean, it was burning for 7 hours. And the person that knew about it, that was working at the department, he couldn't drive the fire truck. And like you mentioned, they couldn't get enough help. So, I mean, people knew the house was on fire. There was nothing that they could do.
Exactly. They just sat there and watched, and I believe it was the chief who stated that he was unable to fire he wasn't able to drive the fire truck, so that's why he had to wait for somebody to arrive to help him arrive at the
Yeah.
scene, which is unusual in itself.
I think that's the same guy too that put the box with the organ. Um, I'm not sure if it was liver or heart, but he said he had found something and he put it in the box and it got buried where the house collapsed. It was bulldozed over. Yeah, he didn't mention that for 2 years though when the occurrence like started to surface again and people were looking into it. So the family was always questioning the fact that there were no remains that were found, and they actually found a few, but it wasn't enough for even a part of a child. But when they found it, it was the bones were vertebrae bones. They were too big. Bones were too big for the age of the person that was missing, so that didn't make any sense. And I think one was an animal bone and the rest were human, but it couldn't have been the young kids. So it's like they were brought in after the fact and they didn't have any burn marks on the bones that they did find. So I mean,
Yeah,
7 or 8 hours, something would have happened. They wouldn't have
right.
been shiny and new looking.
Yeah, the fact that they later identified, stated that they did find bones and a piece of organ or something, whatever it might have been, and they later turned and just the timing of it was kind of bizarre. Yeah, like you
Yeah,
mentioned, they didn't even have enough. They didn't have enough fragments to account for 5 children. You know what I mean?
yeah. And how you mentioned the truck, they had two work trucks that they had used the day before. So they were running the day before, but George and his son couldn't get either one of them to run when they were trying to back them up to back up to the window on the second floor so they could rescue the kids. And then I guess the ladder could have been moved by anybody, but the way the story was, it always sat in the same place. So when you start adding all these little coincidences up, it just leads you to believe there is foul play. And this was a really small town. I think, well, when I looked it up, it said 2010, there was like, in 2010, it had like little under 3,000 people. But back in like 1945, I think it was like 12 or 1,300 people. So I think there was a lot of collusion with the people that were running the town. This family, they couldn't catch a break, or they couldn't get enough evidence because people were, everything was messed up on this case. Like everything was slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, it was definitely bizarre, and there was a lot of details looking back makes you think there's a lot of stuff that just didn't add up or didn't make sense. But at the time you're grieving for your 5 children, of course you're not going to see this right away.
Well, also real quick, that mysterious phone call that you mentioned. So it was kind of like a prank call almost, is what it kind of sounded like when you're looking into the story. Like, yeah, it was just a wrong number, no big deal. But I was wondering if that was kind of to check to make sure somebody was actually at the house before all this happened. And they also found some kind of grenade. I don't remember what it was called, but when Jenny was trying to sleep, she woke up a couple of times and she thought it was wind before the house caught on fire. And then she just kind of turned over, forgot about that. And she heard a thump on the roof. And later they did find a grenade. It had a name. I don't remember what kind it was, but it would have been back in the World War II days. So,
Wow.
and whatever they had back then, I don't know. I don't know what damage that was, trying to do when they had a fire that went up, but it
Yeah.
was just another odd sound that night.
So I don't think I covered this, but an interesting detail is according to the firefighting department, they stated that the house was caused by an electrical shortage. So that's a fun fact for you.
Yeah,
Uh,
didn't they find in the circuit boxes that the wires were cut? Like it wasn't burned. They were clearing cuts on those wires.
yeah, they they had found cuts on the phone lines, and they found the cuts on the electrical panel. It's
And that's
clean
where
cuts.
George's office was, the dad's office.
Right, exactly. So, Jared, what I know you did extensive research on this as well. What were you able to find on this story?
So I'll kind of start from the top. I find it odd that she woke up to the phone, Jenny Sodder did, at 12:30, and obviously, she heard a woman's voice who she did not recognize, and then got off the phone, checked on her children. Everything looked as it was going according to plan, letting the kids stay up late for Christmas Eve, late at night, that's Christmas. 1 a.m. she woke up to the sound of objects hitting her roof, which is weird. And then at 1:30, house is on fire. Got up, found the actual fire was in George's office, which is where the fuse box and telephone wires were. And so you look deeper into the story. They couldn't go upstairs because the staircase was aflame, obviously. And the phone did not work when they tried to call for help. So I'm assuming, I might be wrong, but that's probably 140, 130, 145. So in just an hour and a half timeline, someone was able to climb the telephone pole and cut the wires. You can look at the whole weird situation with the fire department. It was small and it was volunteer only, which is very odd for us nowadays. That might have been normal back then. I don't really know. Some accounts stated that they did find bones, and some of the bones that some of the accounts say were animal bones, and the others say that there were no bones found. When, in all reports that I've seen, they ended up finding actual they actually found some pieces in the house. Like they they found, I believe it was like some kitchenware sets that were still intact after the house had burned down. And so Jenny Sodder actually, she tried to burn animal bones to ash and was able to do so. So she ended up contacting a crematorium who told her for a 2-hour fire at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, that was still leave human bones intact, and that is hotter and longer than the Sodder's house fire was. Obviously, the whole family was in just complete distress. Very, 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 very hard situation. And when you look at the accounts of a driver of a bus that was passing through there Christmas Eve, said that he saw people throwing balls of fire out of the house.
Oh
You
wow.
know,
Yeah.
is he just so caught up in the whole thing that he's making up stories, or is he being truthful? Same thing with the people that claim they saw the children in a vehicle the night of the fire and have seen them since. You know what I mean?
Right.
And later on, they looked back and, like, the initial house fire, there was nothing to be found. And then in 1949, the site of the house fire, human vertebrae bones were found, and they didn't they didn't add up to the age, like Ken had also said. And it's a very weird thing. You have people coming forward and saying, oh, I saw the kids in a car, up to, I believe, a few weeks after. And it's just a very odd situation. Who would move their ladder that was there?
75 feet away.
Yeah, who would move it? And then they threw it into, like, what, a little valley or something weird like that.
It was like a little ditch, little sequoia or something.
And the biggest thing that I wanted to touch on was, I believe it was October of 1945. A life insurance salesman came and approached George Sodder with a policy, and when Sodder declined, it is his written account that the insurance salesman said that your house will go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. The salesman kind of told him that it was because of the dirty remarks that he was making about Mussolini, which was obviously a very controversial figure in World War II. That could be a correlation. Maybe it was just the perfect storm of so many people coming together and making something happen. But at the same time, it's like these people were a middle class, well-known family. They weren't a high class, prominent family. So what would their motive be, and why would they do it if they all came together and made this whole thing happen? Maybe there's deeper roots that George Sodder never came forward with that he was involved in. We don't know about that. There could be deeper roots to this, and that's just kind of what I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to piggyback off that, initially I like what you had said about why would people be coming forward with this information. It reminds me of a lot of cases that the FBI, the CIA, local police departments, they will come out and they will put out requests for any information, and you get a lot of different people calling in with weird information. They'd seen the victim, they knew the victim was at their house, they saw him at a 7-Eleven, or things like they were the ones that committed the atrocity and they knew where the body was, which every time those reports are investigated, they're always false. I like how you brought up the salesman there. So a little bit of a backstory. The Fayetteville community was believed to be an immigrant community with a lot of Italian descent in the area. As I mentioned before, this was during the World War II period. And of course, the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini was in power at the time. And George openly was outspoken against this Italian dictator, which led to multiple arguments with other members of the immigrant community, which obviously would lead to a salesman being upset with George and threatening his house going up in fire. There was also another story that I read about. There was an individual that approached George looking for work, and this individual, for some reason, went to the fuse boxes on the side of the house, obviously where the lines were cut, as Ken had already mentioned, and made a comment that said, these fuse boxes are going to cause a fire someday, which is a very odd thing to tell someone, right? George himself had a dispute with the Fayetteville Fire Department on their findings of the fire starting with electrical origins. So George had notified the fire department as well as the police that he had recently had the house rewired and inspected because they had installed a stove, which obviously needed a different kind of outlet to run the stove. So that is totally that could totally be the case, that the house had just been rewired and inspected as he was talking about. And I also wanted to jump back and talk about what Ken brought up, and Jared, you touched on this too, was the noise that was heard by Jenny Sodder in the middle of the night, which sounded like something loud hitting the house. I didn't even know this, but Ken found this piece of information that they had found a hand grenade amongst the ashes, Ken?
Yeah. Yeah, this is pretty strange. It had a specific name. I wish I could remember it, but yeah, so this is one of the sounds she heard. I mean, if you just take like some of the main information, you're looking at a dispute in a small town, and all these random people, whether it's looking for work or whatever the case, they end up on their property. It's like they're setting this plan up that they follow through on, and they actually hint to the family what's going to happen to them, and it just seems like
Well, and just so you know, what they found on their house was commonly known as a pineapple bomb.
that's what it was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh wow, pineapple bomb.
So that's nothing like a grenade. I don't know why I thought it was. I thought I saw something like a grenade.
So it's a rubber-like object. It looked like a hand grenade, or it looked something similar to either a hand grenade or an incendiary device used in combat. And so that's where they think the fire actually started, was because one of those was tossed onto the roof.
Okay.
That's where the balls of fire account came into fruition.
Interesting. So neighbors could have witnessed somebody tossing it, right?
Yes, actually,
Yeah.
the person that witnessed it on first-hand account was a local bus driver.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, didn't he pass the house and then he went to go get help? He couldn't, and then when he came back to the house, the timing didn't match up from when the house was actually burning from when he actually drove by it.
There's so
Lot of
many different
strange-
accounts on
Yeah.
this. We might have different information, but that's all I know, is just that a local bus driver is the one who saw balls of fire literally being tossed at the house.
That's very interesting that you both brought that up, because there was another story of the son sharing with the police, stating that he had noticed a a strange car parked down the road from where I believe the missing Sodder children would, I'm assuming, get off their bus and make their way home. And the son
Mm-hmm.
would later state that it seemed like the man was watching the children. And this is all information after a traumatic event. The I'm not gonna say that the Sodder family, the surviving members, would have intentionally lied about any of this information. I'm just stating the fact that after a traumatic event, some of the details might have been a little bit elaborated, maybe a little bit. I'd hate to say something like that, but after a traumatic event, I don't know if I would be able to get very many details straight. I can't even get very many details straight. Uh, just going from my everyday day-to-day life. Sometimes I'm not even sure if I'm going the right route home. So
I know that game.
yeah, that's like on a normal day for me. So I can only imagine if something traumatic had happened, I would be a mess. I'd be all over the place. But I think it was you, Jared. What information did you were able to find about the children had been seen later on? Was there any information anybody was able to find about that?
There's a few articles of people that came forward saying like before the fires even happened, they saw the kids, a few of the kids, and also something that I wanted to bring up was 1967. Jenny Sodder received a photo in the mail, and it was actually of a man that resembled one of the missing children, Louis or Louis Sodder. And the photo read, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie," and it said A90132 or 35, and it had an updated picture of the boy, and she thought that it resembled identically her son Louis, and that's just something to add to the mystery of like who were these kids taken from if they were actually taken, because there's really not any evidence of them burning down a fire. So what was the motive at the end of the day, and how did these kids gain access? How did Louis gain access to their address and gain access to actually insert a picture and say, "I love brother Frankie" into this? And that's like a huge mystery that I'm really wanting the audience to talk back on and what their ideology could be on who took them and why the captors or whoever would even give them this much freedom.
And I love that, and I love how that's going to lead us into our next segment. Since Jared, you're already on a roll there, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. In your personal opinion, Jared, what do you believe happened to the children, or what do you think initially happened, and what do you think happened to the children?
You know, there were some very offhand accounts of they some people believe that the family in some way or another was affiliated with the Sicilian mafia at the time, and the fire was started and the children were taken in an attempt to extort money. That personally, that is one of the only things that I can believe, because the house didn't get hot enough to cremate the actual bones, and there was just too many circumstances that worked against the family. And how did that many kids go missing? You know what I mean? So I'm really sticking to this fact of the Sicilian mafia, just because just of all the history and the research that I've done. I mean, they make things happen. I mean, we're not stupid. We know that there's people out there that can make things happen like this. And so that's what I'm sticking with. Because not only is the Sicilian mafia, who knows, they could have paid off the fire department. They could have paid off the cops. They could have, that insurance salesman could have been working for them. And who knows, maybe the father was involved in something bigger than what he was ever too okay to say that he was associated with. And so that's the story that I'm sticking with, because how do so many people see the kids? How do you get a picture of one of your kids later on? It has to be something affiliated with that, and that's what I'm sticking with.
That's great. And that actually sounds like a pretty solid statement. And like you said, it is, if it's the Sicilian mafia and you have the father figure of the household speaking out against an Italian dictator in an immigrant community, it is totally believable that in retaliation to put the father in his place or to send him a message is they stage a fire and they kidnap the children. And, that's just his warning. So, great job, Jared. I thought that was great. Ken, what do you got for us? What do you think happened? What do you think happened to the children?
Well, it's like a small town and a lot of crime. It all seems connected to me with the upper class, of the time. During World War II, or just right after, the black market was a big deal for people that couldn't have their own children. That was something that came up too. So I don't know, with the person that was waiting, like kind of watching the kids down the road in the car. I mean, I think that has something to do with that black market idea with, those kids somehow getting out of the house after the mom went to sleep. I mean, there's all kinds of foul play. And I kind of think it had to do something with that. And then that might explain 20, 30 years down the road, uh, there was a write up in the Charleston Gazette where they were starting, these kids are starting to be seen. I don't know. I think it was the abduction. And if that was the case, nobody died.
That's a great point that you brought up about the whole black market for children because uh, human trafficking is, I believe, one of the greatest, one of the most important topics that doesn't really get discussed about openly. There are a lot of, it's now becoming more in the public spotlight thanks to the events like the Epstein and Maxwell's, right?
Yeah.
They really brought that into the spotlight. Unfortunately, nothing's been done about it, and there's been no accountability for it. But just the fact that there is a market for this, and it's publicly known that there are actually criminal gangs in the world that do this human trafficking of
Mm-hmm.
children, of anybody basically, and eventually sells them into slavery. So why wouldn't it be something that's viable in 1945?
I think airplane stewardess are now trained on what to look for kids traveling with adults. And like the biggest time of the year, it's all about people that I don't know if they're so rich they're bored or they want to do bad things, but like when they have the Super Bowl games is when a lot of the kids are brought from different countries and moved across states and stuff like that. So they actually do a lot of busts for that kind of thing around Super Bowl time because these kids are brought to parties and stuff like that, and gross.
Absolutely. Major major events, Super Bowl, the Olympics, you name it. Perfectly great examples of how they could easily get away with transporting humans. And I
Mhm.
I remember hearing a story a while back, and I can't remember if it was during the pandemic or it was after the pandemic. I believe it was in England. They had found a trailer full of dead people. I believe the final conclusion that these people were meant to be human trafficked. They were being transported for human trafficking purposes. That's as far as I got on that story. I'm not sure what the final result on it, if they were able to find out who was responsible for this. If you
Wow.
look, if you look back at the whole the whole Epstein Maxwell situation, those were significant court cases. Well, for Ghislaine, I know that Epstein didn't hang himself and never made it to trial, but they there was never any conclusive results resulting in this, and those people that were involved, whether they were low lifes, whether they were the 1%, whether they were in positions of power, they walked clean away from it, and there was no accountability for it, and it's almost as if it disappeared from the spotlight. So that's a great theory on that. Great job, Ken.
That's what Jared said. People in power can make anything happen.
People in power can make anything happen, like a criminal gang.
And like the 1%, the really wealthy people that don't have anything better to do start getting into bad things.
Absolutely. So, in conclusion, before I start to wrap this episode up, was there anything else, Jared, that you needed to share?
No, the biggest thing that I have to say is I think that this whole episode and this whole topic is very fascinating to all of us. And, you know, even though it happened a long time ago, we never know. Someone might be able to dig up some paperwork that shows what actually happened. We never know. And that's what keeps us on our toes. And we all have our own different ideologies of kind of what happened. And I think it's going to be awesome for maybe the future to maybe the universe to unravel itself and show us who is right, who is wrong. And even it's not about who's right and who's wrong, but just validation of, man, what is this world capable of? I mean, so a whole ass family lost so many people, and there was hints of them throughout history later on. So how does that happen? Could that happen now? You know, we don't know, and that's what I love about this case. I really do. And whatever, give me your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's it's like this whole situation was ahead of its time. You weren't hearing about, like people do a lot of extreme stuff now, but I don't know why it's such a shock to learn about this way back then when, it's always kind of happening. But I don't know, I guess it's like the reports. There wasn't a bunch of reports that said the exact same thing. There was holes and everything all the way around. So it just seems like it had to do with a small town working together against this family. I don't know. It's just really strange.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it best. A small community of immigrants that had a outspoken member bad mouthing possibly what they might have perceived as bad mouthing the motherland. And I really like the fact how you both brought up the importance of these stories, because in my opinion, and this is going to sound kind of corny, but in my opinion, these stories are important to never be forgotten, to continuously share them. And I believe in a way that's kind of why we're here, is to talk about these stories. No matter what your opinions are on a lot of the stories that we do share on this podcast, there is details and facts that you just simply need to discuss and have an open discussion about it, because I believe that there's not that much discussion going on in today's topics talking about stuff like this. So like I mentioned, I think that's why we're here, to share the message, to open up everybody's mind onto different possibilities, situations that could occur that we have no idea about. And not to get even more cornier, but I'll go into it anyways, it's kind of the name behind sleepwalkers, and I've talked about this a lot. The whole meaning behind sleepwalkers is, I believe that everybody spends their time going through life asleep. Obviously not physically, but figuratively. We're basically sleepwalking all day long because we are so bombarded with flashes of entertainment in our faces, and we never stop to consider stories like this that are still happening in today's world. And it's important for us to openly discuss this and create a community that would hopefully go on to share this with other communities and start like a tree networking thing, sort of. That makes sense. Yeah, this was a great episode. There was a lot of information that was discussed in relation to the disappearance of the missing Sodder children. I hope you were able to grab as much information as you could from this. And please stick around, please subscribe, please like as much as possible. Please reach out to us, like Jared said, with your theories or thoughts on this. And don't forget to join us for our next episode, where we will be discussing the suicide forest, which was a forest located in Japan that has very different mysterious elements to it and a lot of backstory to it, which I know Jared is an expert on, and he'd be happy to share with us on that. And we wanted to thank you from all of us here at Sleepwalkers Podcast for listening in to us, and we hope that you have a very great day.
Just stay weird, people. Y'all enjoy the episodes, give us feedback, and give us your opinions on what you thought happened to the family members. Stay weird.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in. Thank you, guys.